My name is Grace, 34 years old, and I never imagined I'd be barricading my bedroom door at 3 in the morning while my own mother swung a baseball bat at my living room windows. The sound of shattering glass mixed with my 8-year-old daughter's terrified screams will haunt me forever. They wanted me to sell my grandmother's house to pay their combined debt of $150,000. But what they didn't know was that I had been secretly recording everything for the past 6 months. Before I share how my own family turned into violent intruders, let me know where you're watching from today. If you've ever dealt with toxic family members who felt entitled to your success, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Trust me, what happened next will show you exactly why sometimes your worst enemies share your last name. Everything changed when my grandmother Dorothy passed away last spring. She was 92 years old, and the only person in my family who ever truly understood me. While everyone else saw me as the boring daughter who worked too much and played it too safe, Grandma Dorothy saw something different. She saw a survivor, a single mother fighting to create stability for her daughter in a family full of chaos. When her lawyer called me in for the reading of the will, I had no idea my life was about to become a battlefield. The house stood on Maple Street, a beautiful Victorian worth $850,000 in today's market. Grandma had lived there for 60 years, raised her children there, and welcomed her grandchildren every summer. I still remembered the smell of her apple pies cooling on the windowsill and the way the afternoon sun streamed through the stained glass windows. As I sat in that lawyer's office surrounded by my mother, Helen, and siblings Derek and Melissa, I thought we were all there to share memories and divide some small keepsakes. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading. Most of the will was standard stuff like personal items and small cash gifts to various relatives. Then came the big revelation. The house, the beautiful house we all loved, was left entirely to me. Not to be divided, not to be sold and split, but given wholly and completely to Grace Elizabeth Monroe. The silence in that room was deafening for about 3 seconds before the explosion began. My mother, Helen, 58 years old, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a gambling problem she thought nobody knew about, was the first to react. Her face went from confused to shocked to furious in the span of seconds. Derek, my older brother at 38, slammed his fist on the table so hard the water glasses jumped. He was on his 3rd divorce and his 4th failed business venture, but somehow still maintained that the world owed him success. Melissa, the baby at 31, started crying those fake tears she had perfected as a child. She called herself a social media influencer, but really just maxed out credit cards trying to look rich online. The lawyer continued reading, and it got worse for them. Grandma had included a letter explaining her decision. She wrote that I was the only grandchild who visited her without asking for money, the only one who called just to chat, and the only one she trusted to preserve the family home, rather than sell it for quick cash. She mentioned how I had struggled as a single mother after Emma's father abandoned us, how I worked 2 jobs without complaining, and how I never once asked her for financial help despite my struggles. The rage in that room was suffocating. Derek stood up so fast his chair fell backward. He pointed at me with a shaking finger and accused me of manipulating a sick old woman. Melissa wailed about how unfair it was, how she needed money for her business ventures. But it was my mother's cold, calculating stare that worried me the most. She didn't yell or cry. She just looked at me like I was a problem that needed solving. I tried to reason with them. I explained that I needed the house for Emma, that we had been living in a tiny apartment with black mold and a landlord who refused repairs. My daughter deserved stability, a real home, a place where she could have her own room and a yard to play in. I reminded them that I had never taken anything from the family, had never asked for loans or handouts like they constantly did. But my words fell on deaf ears. The guilt trip started immediately. Mom began talking about how she had raised us all, equally sacrificed so much, and couldn't believe I would be so selfish. She conveniently forgot the times she had cashed out my college fund for casino trips, or how she had refinanced her house 3 times to cover gambling losses. Derek chimed in about family loyalty, which was rich coming from someone who had borrowed $30,000 from Grandma just last year and never paid back a cent. That night, they called a family meeting at Mom's house. They presented it as an opportunity to discuss the situation calmly to find a solution that worked for everyone. I should have known better. When I arrived with Emma, I found they had already made plans. Derek had spreadsheets showing how much the house was worth and how the proceeds could be divided. Melissa had found real estate agents and was comparing commission rates. Mom had even drafted a letter for me to sign agreeing to sell the house within 90 days. They ambushed me with their proposal. Since we were family, they said the fair thing would be to sell Grandma's house and split the money 4 ways. When I pointed out that Grandma had specifically left it to me, they countered that she wasn't in her right mind, that I had clearly influenced her. The accusations flew thick and fast. I was selfish, ungrateful, and greedy. I thought I was better than them. I had always been the favorite, and now I was rubbing it in their faces. Emma sat quietly beside me, her small hand in mine, watching her grandmother and aunt and uncle transform into strangers. When Derek raised his voice and called me a conniving witch, Emma started to cry. That was when I stood up to leave. As I gathered our things, Mom delivered her final blow. She looked at Emma and said loud enough for everyone to hear that her mother was teaching her to be greedy and selfish, that family meant nothing to people like us. I left that night knowing war had been declared. What I didn't know was how far they would go to get what they wanted. The house was just the beginning. Their entitlement ran deeper than I had ever imagined, and their rage at being denied what they felt they deserved would transform them from difficult relatives into dangerous enemies. 2 weeks after that disastrous family meeting, I received a text from my mother. She wanted to apologize for how things had gone, she said. She realized they had approached it all wrong and wanted to make amends. Could I come to dinner that Sunday? Just family, she promised, no pressure, just a chance to heal and move forward. Against my better judgment and hoping to salvage some kind of relationship for Emma's sake, I agreed. I should have trusted my instincts when I pulled up to Mom's house and saw Derek's BMW and Melissa's leased Mercedes in the driveway. They were all there, dressed nicely, with forced smiles and stiff hugs. Mom had even cooked my favorite meal, something she hadn't done in years. Emma was happy to see her cousins, and for a moment, I let myself hope that maybe they had actually come to their senses. We made it through appetizers and small talk before the real reason for the dinner emerged. Mom excused the children to go play in the basement, and that should have been my cue to leave. Instead, I stayed watching as Derek pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. He placed it on the table with the solemnity of someone presenting evidence in court. Inside that folder was an itemized list of debts that made my stomach drop. At the top in bold letters was the total $150,000. Below it, 3 columns with names, amounts, and descriptions that revealed just how deep in trouble my family really was. Derek's column was the longest, showing $65,000 owed to various creditors from his latest failed business venture, a restaurant that had closed after just 6 months. There were unpaid vendor bills, equipment loans, and 3 months of back rent on the commercial space. Mom's column made me sick. $45,000 in gambling debts, some to legitimate casinos, but others to people Derek darkly referred to as alternative lenders. She had been borrowing from increasingly dangerous sources, chasing her losses with worse bets. The dates showed this had been going on for years, probably funded by the home equity loans I now understood weren't for renovations like she had claimed. Melissa's debts seemed almost quaint in comparison. $40,000 split between maxed-out credit cards and a failed online boutique. She had spent thousands on inventory that now sat in a storage unit, designer clothes for her lifestyle posts that had garnered fewer than 1,000 followers, and professional photography equipment she barely knew how to use. Every line item was a monument to delusion and poor judgment. They let me absorb the numbers before presenting their solution. The math was simple, they said. Grandma's house was worth $850,000. After paying off the $150,000 in debts that left $700,000 to split 4 ways, everyone would get $175,000, enough for fresh starts all around. They had already talked to real estate agents who could have it on the market by Monday. One had even suggested staging companies and estimated we could sell within 30 days in this hot market. I stared at the papers trying to process the audacity of their plan. They had accumulated $150,000 in debts through their own irresponsibility, and now expected me to sell my daughter's inheritance to bail them out. When I found my voice, I asked why they thought I should be responsible for their financial mistakes. That was when the real manipulation began. Mom started crying real tears this time, talking about how she had raised 3 children on her own after Dad left. She had sacrificed everything for us gone without so we could have what we needed. Didn't that mean anything to me? Derek jumped in with stories about how the restaurant would have succeeded if the economy hadn't turned, how he was so close to making it big, just needed this one helping hand from family. Melissa painted herself as a victim of social media algorithms and bad timing, claiming her influence was growing, and she would pay everyone back once she hit it big. They had rehearsed their sob stories, each taking turns to pile on the guilt. But then came the threats wrapped in concern. Mom mentioned how dangerous some of her creditors were becoming, how they had started calling at all hours and showing up at her work. Derek talked about the stress ruining his marriage, how his wife was threatening to leave and take the kids. Melissa sobbed about her credit being destroyed, how she couldn't even rent an apartment anymore. The trap they were setting became crystal clear when Derek pulled out another document. This one was a family loan agreement they had drafted showing how I could borrow against the house to pay their debts with them, supposedly paying me back over time. The interest rate was laughable, the terms impossible, and I knew they would never pay a cent. It was just a prettier way of saying I should hand over my inheritance. I told them no. Not maybe not. I'll think about it, just no. I would not sell Grandma's house. I would not take out loans against it. I would not enable their continued irresponsibility by cleaning up their messes. Emma deserved the security that house provided, and I wouldn't sacrifice her future for their mistakes. The fury that erupted made the previous family meeting look calm. Derek accused me of wanting to see them all destroyed. Mom said I was heartless and cruel, that I had always been cold and calculating. Melissa screamed that I was jealous of her success and wanted to see her fail. The accusations became increasingly unhinged. I had poisoned Grandma against them. I had probably been planning this for years. I thought I was so much better than them with my stable job and my perfect daughter. Then came the most chilling revelation. Mom let slip that they had already been in Grandma's house. She mentioned casually that they had looked for additional valuables, thinking maybe there were things that could be sold without touching the house itself. My blood ran cold as I realized they had been there without my permission, going through Grandma's belongings, treating the place like their personal treasure hunt. I gathered Emma quickly after that, ignoring their continued shouts and threats. As we drove away, I noticed Derek following us for several blocks before finally turning off. Emma was quiet in the back seat, and when she finally spoke, she asked why everyone was so angry about Great-Grandma's house. I tried to explain in terms an 8-year-old could understand, but how do you tell a child that family members can be dangerous? That night, I called a locksmith and had every lock in Grandma's house changed. I also called the estate lawyer to report that family members had accessed the property without authorization. He seemed unsurprised and mentioned this was more common than I'd think in inheritance situations. He also gave me the name of a security company, suggesting I might want to consider cameras. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Looking back, he was trying to warn me about what was coming. The morning after I changed the locks, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. First Mom, then Derek, then Melissa, then Mom again. 27 calls before I even got Emma ready for school. The voicemails ranged from pleading to threatening to completely unhinged. Derek's were the worst, filled with profanity and accusations that would have made a sailor blush. I saved every single one. By the time I dropped Emma at school, the calls had escalated to texts. Screenshots of my social media posts with nasty comments, pictures of the house with captions about greed and selfishness, and long rambling messages about family loyalty and disappointment. Melissa had started her campaign on Instagram, posting throwback photos of family gatherings with captions about how money had torn us apart. How some people valued property over people. The first time Derek showed up at my workplace, I was in a meeting with clients. The receptionist interrupted to say my brother was in the lobby claiming a family emergency. I excused myself, thinking something had happened to Mom, only to find Derek pacing like a caged animal. The moment he saw me, he started yelling about the locks, about being treated like a criminal, about how dare I keep him from his grandmother's house. Security had to escort him out while my coworkers watched in horror. That afternoon, my boss called me in for a conversation about maintaining professional boundaries and keeping personal issues out of the workplace. I tried to explain, but how do you make someone understand that your family has declared war on you over an inheritance? She was sympathetic but firm that this couldn't happen again. The promotion I had been working toward for 2 years suddenly seemed less certain. The harassment at work became a pattern. Melissa would show up with fake tears, telling anyone who would listen that I was keeping her from retrieving sentimental items from our grandmother's house. Mom called the main company line, repeatedly identifying herself as my mother and insisting on being transferred to my supervisor to discuss my cruel behavior. Derek sent flowers to the office with cards calling me terrible names, ensuring the receptionist and delivery person saw the messages. But the workplace harassment was just one front in their war. They had somehow figured out Emma's school schedule and began their campaign there too. Melissa would park outside during pickup time, trying to approach Emma before I arrived. The school security officer had to intervene twice before I could get a formal no-contact order in place. Derek started following the school bus in the mornings, waving at Emma through the windows, and confusing the driver about his intentions. The psychological toll on Emma was immediate and heartbreaking. She started having nightmares about angry relatives breaking into our apartment. She became clingy and anxious, asking repeatedly if we were safe, if the family was going to take away great-grandma's house, if I was going to disappear like her father had. Her teacher called to report that Emma had been crying during class, drawing pictures of houses with big locks and alarm systems. That was when my best friend Tanya stepped in. As a paralegal at a family law firm, she had seen this kind of inheritance harassment before. She arrived at my apartment with a digital recorder, a notebook, and a determination that reminded me why we had been friends since college. Her advice was simple but crucial to everything that followed. Document everything. Save every text record, every interaction legally possible, photograph any damage or unwanted presence. Build a case because this was going to end up in court. Tanya helped me install security cameras at both my apartment and Grandma's house. The expense hurt, but it proved invaluable within days. The cameras caught Derek trying to use what looked like a bump key on the back door of Grandma's house at 2 a.m. They recorded Melissa spray painting the word "selfish" on the garden shed. They captured Mom going through the mailbox, stealing what turned out to be utility bills and tax documents she hoped to use against me. The false emergency calls began 2 weeks into their campaign. Mom called my workplace claiming I had been in an accident, and they needed to reach me immediately. She called Emma's school saying there was a family emergency, and she needed to pick up her granddaughter. The school thankfully followed protocol and called me first. But the disruption to our lives was constant and exhausting. Then came the call that shook me to my core. Child Protective Services showed up at my apartment on a Thursday evening, responding to an anonymous report that I was an unstable mother neglecting my child. The caseworker was professional but thorough, inspecting our living conditions, interviewing Emma separately, and reviewing my employment and financial records. The investigation found nothing concerning, of course, but the damage was done. Emma had been traumatized by strangers questioning her about our life, and I had a CPS investigation on my record. Financial sabotage came next. Mom had enough of my personal information from years of being my mother to attempt accessing my bank accounts. The fraud alerts saved me, but I spent hours on the phone with banks, credit agencies, and financial institutions putting freezes and extra security measures in place. I discovered she had tried to add herself to my car insurance, attempted to redirect my mail to her address, and even called my employer pretending to be me to change my direct deposit information. The security cameras became our lifeline, catching increasingly bold attempts at intimidation. Derek was recorded trying to jimmy windows, checking for spare keys under flower pots, and even attempting to remove the electric meter from Grandma's house. When confronted by neighbors, he claimed to be doing maintenance, that there had been a family miscommunication about the property. The lies flowed so easily it was chilling to watch. My salvation came from an unexpected source. Tanya's boss attorney, Sarah Chen, took interest in my case. She agreed to represent me pro bono, initially seeing it as a textbook case of inheritance harassment. Her first action was to send formal cease and desist letters to all 3 family members outlining the legal consequences of their continued harassment. The letters were detailed, professional, and apparently terrifying enough to give me exactly 48 hours of peace. But peace was temporary in this war. Mom's response to the legal letter was to fake a heart attack. The dramatic performance happened at a local grocery store where she knew mutual acquaintances would witness it. She clutched her chest, called my name, and collapsed while screaming about the stress of being estranged from her daughter. The paramedics found nothing wrong, but the gossip mill had already started. My phone filled with messages from distant relatives and family friends, asking how I could do this to my poor mother. The campaign had been going on for a month when I realized the toll it was taking. I had lost 12 pounds from stress, Emma was seeing the school counselor twice a week, and my work performance was suffering despite my best efforts. The security footage I reviewed each night showed escalating attempts at entry, increasingly aggressive behavior, and a determination that suggested this was far from over. They were building up to something bigger, and I could feel it coming like a storm on the horizon. The breaking point came when I discovered the full extent of their plans. While organizing Grandma's papers, I found documentation she had hidden about previous attempts by my family to manipulate her. There were letters from Derek demanding early inheritance records of Mom trying to refinance Grandma's house without her knowledge, and evidence of Melissa attempting to become power of attorney through forged documents. Grandma had known exactly who they were and had protected her assets accordingly. She had also left a sealed letter for her attorney with instructions to give it to me if the family contested the will. That letter would become crucial in the legal battles ahead, but first I had to survive what was coming next. The cease and desist letters had bought me 2 days of peace before my family regrouped with a new strategy. The first sign of their legal offensive came in the form of an official-looking envelope slipped under my apartment door. Inside was what appeared to be a formal legal notice from the law offices of Henderson and Associates, demanding I cease occupancy of the property on Maple Street and surrender all keys within 7 days. The letterhead looked legitimate. The language was full of legal jargon, and for a moment my heart sank. Thank God for Tanya and her keen paralegal eye. She took one look at the document and started laughing, though it was more relieved than amused. The letter was completely fake. The law firm didn't exist, the case numbers were fabricated, and the legal citations were nonsense. Someone had done just enough research to make it look scary, but not enough to make it legally valid. The printer ink was still fresh, and a reverse image search showed the letterhead was stolen from a template website. Sarah Chen was less amused when I brought her the fake document. Impersonating an attorney and creating fraudulent legal documents were serious crimes. She immediately filed a complaint with the state bar and local police, adding another layer to our growing case against my family. But she warned me this was likely just the beginning. Desperate people do desperate things, and my family was clearly escalating. 3 days later, they found a real lawyer. Helen's boyfriend Carl, who I had forgotten existed until then, apparently had a cousin who had barely passed the bar exam and was desperate enough for clients to take on a hopeless case. Attorney Marcus Webb was everything you'd expect from a bargain basement lawyer, including the polyester suit, an office in a strip mall between a payday loan place, and a psychic. The real legal threats came fast and hard. Webb filed a motion to contest the will, claiming undue influence and diminished capacity. He alleged that I had manipulated my elderly grandmother, isolated her from the rest of the family, and coerced her into changing her will in my favor. The documents were poorly written and full of spelling errors, but they were real court filings that required a real response. Sarah's counter-response was a masterpiece of legal precision. She systematically destroyed each claim with evidence I didn't even know existed. Grandma's attorney, it turned out, had been thoroughly documenting her mental capacity for years, anticipating exactly this situation. There were video recordings of Grandma discussing her will cognitive assessments from her doctor and detailed notes about why she was disinheriting the others. The crown jewel was a psychological evaluation done just 6 months before her death, showing her mind was sharp as ever. The mediation disaster happened on a Tuesday morning that started with rain and ended with police involvement. The courthouse mediation room was supposed to be neutral ground, where reasonable people could reach reasonable solutions. Instead, it became a stage for my family's most unhinged performance yet. They arrived like they were going to war, including Mom in her best manipulation outfit, all black like she was in mourning. Derek in an ill-fitting suit that screamed borrowed from someone more successful, and Melissa dressed like she was heading to a nightclub rather than court. Webb started by presenting their evidence, and it was even more ridiculous than the initial filing. They had created a whole narrative where I had been planning this theft for years. There were photos of me visiting Grandma presented as evidence of isolation, as if visiting your grandmother was suspicious. They had printed out birthday cards I had sent her circling words like love and miss you as proof of manipulation. Derek had even created a spreadsheet showing how often each family member visited, conveniently leaving out that most of his visits coincided with requests for money. The most shocking moment came when they presented a letter supposedly written by me, promising to share the house equally with my siblings. It was a decent forgery, I'll give them that. The handwriting was close enough to mine that for a second I doubted myself. But Sarah was prepared. She had brought a handwriting expert who took one look at the letter and identified 17 points of difference from my actual writing. The paper was wrong, the ink was too fresh, and most damningly it was dated on a day when I had been provably 3 states away at a work conference. When their fake evidence fell apart, the real fireworks began. Derek slammed his fist on the table and accused the mediator of being biased. Mom started wailing about her mother's house being stolen from her, conveniently forgetting she had been explicitly disinherited. Melissa live-streamed the whole thing on Instagram until the mediator threatened to hold her in contempt. Webb looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. The mediation ended when Derek lunged across the table at me. He didn't make contact thanks to the quick reflexes of the court security officer, but the intent was clear. As they escorted him out, he screamed threats that everyone in the building could hear. He would burn the house down before he let me have it. He would make sure Emma knew what kind of person her mother really was. He would destroy my life like I had destroyed his. Every threat was captured by the court reporter and surveillance cameras. Outside in the parking garage, things got worse. I had parked on the 3rd level, and as Sarah and I walked to our cars, Derek appeared from behind a concrete pillar. His eyes were wild, his face red with rage, and his fists clenched at his sides. He blocked our path and started ranting about family betrayal, about how I had ruined everything, about how this wasn't over. Sarah immediately called security while I stood frozen, my hand on my phone, ready to call 911. The restraining order was filed that afternoon. With Derek's courthouse threats and the parking garage incident, we had more than enough for an emergency protective order. The judge granted it immediately, ordering Derek to stay at least 500 feet away from me, Emma, our home, Grandma's house, my workplace, and Emma's school. Mom and Melissa were added to the order after Sarah presented evidence of their coordinated harassment campaign. Of course, they violated the restraining order within 24 hours. Melissa, perhaps thinking she was being clever, decided to live stream from the sidewalk in front of Grandma's house. She stood just beyond the property line, filming herself, crying about being kept from her grandmother's legacy. She went on for 20 minutes about cruel sisters and stolen inheritance before a neighbor called the police. The officers who responded were the same ones who had been to the house multiple times before, and they were losing patience with my family's antics. The violation got Melissa arrested, though she was released on her own recognizance within hours. But it established a pattern of disregard for court orders that would become important later. Sarah made sure every violation was documented, every arrest recorded, every contempt of court noted. We were building a case that would be ironclad when the real trial came. During this time, I made a disturbing discovery while going through more of Grandma's papers. Hidden in a recipe box in the kitchen, I found receipts and photos documenting something that made my blood run cold. My mother had been systematically stealing from Grandma for years. There were pawn shop receipts for jewelry that Grandma had reported missing, bank statements showing suspicious withdrawals when Grandma was in the hospital, and even photos of Mom in Grandma's bedroom going through drawers apparently taken by Grandma herself, who had grown suspicious. The crown jewel of Grandma's evidence was a safety deposit box I didn't know existed. Her lawyer had the key and instructions to give it to me if the will was contested. Inside was a treasure trove of documentation, including medical records proving Mom had tried to have Grandma declared incompetent 3 years ago, and failed recorded conversations where Derek threatened Grandma if she didn't loan him more money, and copies of forged checks that Melissa had written on Grandma's account. Grandma had been building this case for years, knowing her children would come after her estate like vultures. The legal bills were mounting despite Sarah's generous fee structure. I had to cash out my retirement savings to cover court costs, expert witnesses, and security improvements. Every dollar spent protecting myself and Emma was a dollar not going toward her college fund or our future. But I had no choice. The alternative was losing everything Grandma had wanted us to have, and letting my family's greed win. Emma's school implemented new security protocols because of the restraining order violations. She had to be signed in and out by me personally, no exceptions. The school resource officer was briefed on the situation and had photos of Mom, Derek, and Melissa. Emma started asking why she needed special rules, why other kids' families could pick them up, but hers couldn't. Try explaining restraining orders to an 8-year-old without destroying their faith in family. Through all of this, I kept working, kept showing up, kept trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Emma. But the stress was showing. My supervisor called me in for another meeting, this time with HR present. While they were sympathetic to my situation, the disruptions were affecting the entire office. If things didn't stabilize soon, they would have to consider whether I could effectively perform my job. The promotion I had worked so hard for was officially off the table. The final straw in the legal battle came when Webb filed an emergency motion claiming I was destroying property and selling off estate assets. This was completely fabricated, but it required an immediate response. The emergency hearing was scheduled for a Friday afternoon, and Webb promised shocking evidence of my misconduct. I spent the entire week sick with anxiety, wondering what new lies they had concocted. In court that Friday, Webb presented his shocking evidence, which turned out to be photos of me having garage sale at my apartment complex. I had been selling my own belongings to pay for legal fees, including furniture and electronics I could live without. They tried to claim these were items from Grandma's house, but Sarah quickly proved everything in the photos had been purchased by me with receipts to prove it. The judge was not amused by the waste of court time and sanctioned Webb for filing frivolous motions. That night, exhausted from another day in court, I sat in Emma's room watching her sleep. She had started sucking her thumb again, a habit she had dropped years ago. Her little face was peaceful in sleep, but I could see the stress of recent months in the dark circles under her eyes. I made a decision then. No matter what it took, no matter what it cost me, I would protect her from this toxic family. I would give her the stable, safe home that Grandma had wanted for us. I had no idea that within a week that promise would be tested in ways I never imagined. The legal threats had failed, the harassment campaign had only strengthened my resolve, and my family was running out of options. Desperate people with nothing left to lose are capable of anything. And my family was about to prove just how far they would go to get what they thought they deserved. After the failed emergency motion and Webb's sanctions, my family went eerily quiet. For 2 weeks, there were no calls, no texts, no surprise visits, no social media posts. The restraining orders seemed to finally be working, and I allowed myself to hope that maybe they had accepted defeat. Emma started sleeping better, I caught up on work, and we even spent a peaceful Saturday at Grandma's house planting flowers in her memory. That false sense of security was shattered at exactly 3:17 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. I woke to the sound of breaking glass so loud and violent that for a moment I thought I was dreaming. Then came another crash and another, followed by Emma's terrified scream from the room next door. My heart hammering, I grabbed my phone and the baseball bat I had started keeping beside my bed, a gift from Tanya, who had insisted I needed protection. The sound was coming from downstairs in our apartment. I could hear voices now, familiar voices that made my blood run cold. Derek's drunken slur mixing with my mother's sharp commands and Melissa's nervous giggle. They were in my home. They had broken into my home where my daughter slept. The rage that flooded through me was volcanic, but Emma's whimpered mommy from her doorway froze me in place. I couldn't confront them and protect her at the same time. I pulled Emma into my bedroom and locked the door, then pushed the heavy dresser in front of it as a barricade. My hands shook as I dialed 911, whispering our address and the situation to the dispatcher. 3 family members had broken in. I could hear destruction downstairs. We were barricaded in the upstairs bedroom. The dispatcher's calm voice was the only thing keeping me from complete panic as she assured me officers were on the way. The sounds from downstairs were horrifying. I could hear Derek's baseball bat connecting with what sounded like my television, the crash of pictures being swept off shelves, furniture being overturned. They were destroying everything, and all I could do was hold Emma tight and wait for help. She buried her face in my chest, her small body trembling as I whispered reassurances I didn't believe myself. Then came the sound I had been dreading, which was footsteps on the stairs. They were coming up, and the thin bedroom door with a dresser against it suddenly seemed like tissue paper protection. Derek's voice was right outside, taunting me. He knew I was in there, he said. I could either come out and sign over the house, or he would come in and make me. The baseball bat hit the door with a crack that made Emma scream again. I put Emma in the closet, telling her to be very quiet no matter what she heard. Then I stood facing the door with my own bat raised, ready to defend my daughter with everything I had. The door shook with each impact, the wood beginning to splinter. My mother's voice joined Derek's, not trying to stop him, but encouraging him. She called me selfish, ungrateful, said I had brought this on myself. The sirens were the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Red and blue lights flooded through the bedroom window, and I could hear car doors slamming, officers shouting commands. The battering at my door stopped, immediately replaced by the sound of my family scrambling. But they had waited too long. There was nowhere to run from a second-floor apartment with police surrounding the building. I stayed barricaded until an officer identified himself through the door, and even then I made him show his badge through the peephole before moving the dresser. When I finally opened that door and saw the splintered wood, the dents from Derek's bat, the reality of what had almost happened hit me like a physical blow. If the police had been 5 minutes later, that door would have given way. The scene downstairs looked like a tornado had hit. My television was shattered, family photos torn from walls and stomped on furniture overturned and broken. They had even destroyed Emma's drawings on the refrigerator, her little masterpieces torn to shreds out of pure spite. The sliding glass door they had entered through was completely destroyed, glass everywhere, sparkling in the police flashlights like deadly diamonds. My family's arrest was almost anticlimactic after the violence of their break-in. Derek was so drunk he could barely stand still, clutching the baseball bat like it was his lifeline. The officers had to pry it from his fingers while he ranted about his rightful inheritance. Mom was stone-cold sober, which somehow made her participation worse. She had chosen this, planned, this encouraged, this all while clear-headed. Melissa was live streaming even as they put her in handcuffs, telling her followers she was being arrested for visiting family. The lies they told the police were breathtaking in their audacity. They claimed I had invited them over and then called the police as a setup. They said they were retrieving their own property. Mom even tried to claim she had a key and permission to be there, though she couldn't explain the broken door or the baseball bats. Derek insisted the house on Maple Street was rightfully his, and they were just trying to negotiate. I had to carry Emma past the destruction to get to the police car that would take us to the station. She saw everything, including her artwork, destroyed, her toys, broken, our home violated. The safe space I had tried so hard to create for her was gone in minutes of violence. She didn't cry anymore, just stared with wide, shocked eyes that broke my heart more than any tears could have. At the police station, the security footage from my apartment complex told the real story. Clear as day, there they were at 2:45 a.m., Derek using his bat to smash the sliding door while Mom directed him and Melissa filmed. The audio picked up their conversation about teaching me a lesson, making me sign over the house, showing me what happened when I thought I was better than them. It was premeditated, coordinated, and completely damning. The detective who took my statement had seen a lot in his career, but even he seemed shocked by the family dynamic. He asked if there had been previous violence, and I realized that while there had been threats and property damage, this was the first time they had come with weapons. The escalation was noted, photographed, documented. Emma gave her own statement to a specialist trained in interviewing children, and hearing her describe hiding in the closet while Uncle Derek tried to break down the door was agony. The charges were serious this time. Breaking and entering, destruction of property, criminal threats, violating restraining orders, child endangerment. The baseball bats moved it from simple burglary to assault with deadly weapons. The premeditation shown in the security footage made it conspiracy. Mom's encouragement made her equally culpable, despite never touching a bat herself. Even Melissa's filming could be considered aiding and abetting. The damage assessment was sobering. Over $15,000 in destroyed property, not counting the sentimental items that couldn't be replaced. Every piece of furniture would need to be evaluated for safety. All the glass cleaned up by professionals to ensure no hidden shards could hurt Emma. We couldn't return home that night or for several nights after. The violation went beyond the physical damage to the psychological destruction of our safe space. Emergency housing came from an unexpected source. Sarah Chen had a rental property she used for clients in dangerous situations, and she offered it to us immediately. It was furnished secure, and most importantly, its address wasn't known to my family. Emma and I moved in with just the clothes on our backs, and whatever I could salvage from the apartment. Starting over again, but at least we were safe. The trauma manifested in different ways for both of us. Emma refused to sleep alone, had panic attacks at sudden noises, and went completely silent for 2 days. I found myself checking locks, obsessively jumping at every sound, unable to eat or sleep properly. The hypervigilance was exhausting but impossible to turn off. Every car that drove by too slowly, every unexpected knock, every unknown number calling sent my adrenaline spiking. The security footage from Grandma's house showed they had gone there first. They had tried to break in there too, but the reinforced doors and windows I had installed held. The cameras captured their frustration, Derek beating the doors with his bat while screaming about his birthright. They had only come to my apartment when they couldn't get into the house, settling for terrorizing us instead of stealing what they really wanted. My employer, already frustrated with the ongoing drama, made their position clear when I called to explain why I couldn't come to work. This was the final straw. They would hold my position for 1 week while I sorted things out, but if I couldn't return to normal working conditions by then, they would have to let me go. 15 years with the company's stellar reviews, one promotion track derailed by family insanity, and now facing unemployment. But in that police station at 4 a.m., holding my traumatized daughter while giving statements about my family's violence, the job seemed insignificant. They had crossed every line, broken every bond, destroyed any possibility of reconciliation. They had terrorized a child in pursuit of money and property. They had shown me who they really were beneath the familiar faces, and those people were strangers who happened to share my DNA. The next morning, a neighbor from the apartment complex called. She had been recording from her window when she heard the commotion and had footage from a different angle. In her video, you could clearly hear my mother say, "Break her spirit and she'll sign anything." That single sentence would become crucial in the prosecution. It proved this wasn't just about property. but about breaking me, controlling me, punishing me for not complying with their demands. As the sun rose over our temporary safe house, I made Emma breakfast she wouldn't eat and tried to process what came next. My family was in jail, but they would make bail soon. The criminal cases would proceed alongside the civil battle over the estate. I would need to find new permanent housing deal with insurance companies, probably find a new job, all while helping Emma heal from trauma no child should experience. The war my family had declared had reached its violent crescendo, but I knew it wasn't over. People who could do what they did wouldn't stop just because they'd been arrested. We were in for a long fight, but after surviving that night, I knew we were stronger than they thought. The criminal trial began 6 weeks after the night of the baseball bats. My family had made bail within 48 hours, of course, with Mom putting up her house as collateral. They were ordered to have no contact with Emma or me, to stay away from both properties, and to surrender any weapons. The fact that baseball bats counted as weapons in this context would have been funny if it weren't so terrifying. I had spent those 6 weeks preparing for this moment, working with the prosecutor to ensure every piece of evidence was ready. The state had taken over the criminal case, but I was the star witness, and Emma would have to testify too, though they would do everything possible to make it easier for her. The thought of my 8-year-old daughter having to relive that night in court made me physically ill. The courthouse was the same building where the disastrous mediation had taken place, but this time we entered through a different door, one reserved for victims and witnesses. The prosecutor, Janet Mills, was a force of nature in her 50s who had seen enough domestic violence to recognize family violence when she saw it. She assured me that the evidence was overwhelming, that my family had essentially convicted themselves with their own actions. The defense strategy became clear during opening statements. 3 different lawyers, one for each family member, but a coordinated approach. They weren't denying the break-in or the destruction, but trying to minimize it as a family dispute that got out of hand. They painted my family as desperate people pushed to extremes by my cruelty-grieving individuals who just wanted their fair share of their mother's estate. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing at the absurdity. The prosecution's opening was methodical and devastating. Janet laid out the timeline of escalation from the will reading to the break-in, showing a clear pattern of harassment, intimidation, and finally violence. She had blown up photos of the destroyed apartment, the splintered door, Emma's torn artwork. She played audio from the 911 call where you could hear Derek threatening to break down the door, while Emma cried in the background. When I took the stand, I could feel my family's eyes boring into me from the defense table. Mom had dressed in her church clothes, trying to look like a respectable grandmother instead of someone who had encouraged her son to break into my home. Derek wore a suit that actually fit, this time his hair cut short, trying to look responsible. Melissa had toned down her usual style, going for young professional instead of Instagram influencer. My testimony took most of the first day. Janet walked me through everything chronologically, letting me tell the story in my own words, while introducing evidence along the way. The security footage from my apartment was played multiple times, each viewing making the violence undeniable. The audio of my mother saying, "Break her spirit, and she'll sign anything," echoed through the courtroom, and I saw her flinch when it played. Cross-examination was brutal. Derek's lawyer tried to paint me as a gold digger who had manipulated a sick old woman. He suggested I had always been the favored grandchild and had used that position to steal from my siblings. When he implied that I had coached Emma to lie about that night, Janet objected so forcefully the judge had to call for order. The lawyer backed off, but the damage to my composure was done. Mom's lawyer took a different approach, going for the heartstrings. Wasn't it true that my mother had raised 3 children alone after my father left? Hadn't she sacrificed to give us good lives? Didn't I feel any obligation to help family in need? The questions were designed to make me look heartless, but Janet had prepared me well. I stuck to the facts, refusing to be drawn into emotional manipulation. Melissa's lawyer was the most insulting, suggesting that the whole thing was overblown, that property damage during a family argument wasn't really criminal. He actually tried to argue that live streaming the break-in showed Melissa had nothing to hide, that someone planning a crime wouldn't document it. The mental gymnastics required for that logic would have been impressive if it weren't so pathetic. The physical evidence was overwhelming. Beyond the security footage, there were Derek's fingerprints on the baseball bat glass fragments from my apartment door found in all 3 of their shoes and cell phone records, showing they had coordinated the attack through a group text. The messages were particularly damning, with Derek writing time to show her who's in charge, and Mom responding with "finally." Emma's testimony was handled with incredible care. She testified via closed-circuit television from a comfortable room with a child advocate present. The prosecutor asked simple, direct questions, and Emma's answers were heartbreaking in their honesty. She described the sound of breaking glass, Uncle Derek yelling outside the door, hiding in the closet thinking he was going to hurt her mommy. When asked if she was scared, she said she thought they were going to kill us and take our house. The defense couldn't do much with a child witness without looking monstrous, but they tried. Derek's lawyer asked if Emma was sure about what she heard, if maybe she had been confused or dreaming. Emma's response was pure 8-year-old honesty. She said she knew it was real, because dreams don't make her wet her pants, and she had been so scared she had an accident in the closet. The lawyer quickly ended his questioning after that. Character witnesses came next, and the contrast was stark. The prosecution brought neighbors who described the escalating harassment coworkers who had witnessed Derek's workplace invasions, and Emma's teacher who detailed the psychological impact on my daughter. The defense countered with family friends who hadn't seen my mother in years, but were willing to say she was a good person, and business associates of Derek's who owed him favors. The surprise witness that changed everything was Grandma's best friend, Eleanor Fitzpatrick. She was 90 years old, sharp as a tack, and had something the prosecution had kept under wraps until the perfect moment. Eleanor had been visiting Grandma the day she made her video will, and Grandma had asked her to record a backup copy on her phone in case anything happened to the official one. The video was even more damning than the official will reading. In it, Grandma specifically discussed each family member and why they were being disinherited. She detailed Mom's gambling addiction and theft, Derek's violent temper, and constant demands for money, and Melissa's entitlement and disrespect. She ended by saying she was leaving the house to me, not just because I was responsible, but because she feared what the others might do if they got their hands on it. The revelation that Grandma had known about Mom stealing her jewelry came with receipts, literally. Eleanor had helped Grandma document every theft, every forged check, every suspicious disappearance of valuables. There was a ledger in Grandma's handwriting, listing items stolen, and their approximate value. The total was staggering over $80,000 over 10 years, mostly pawned to feed Mom's gambling addiction. Derek's history of violence was laid bare through police reports Eleanor had helped Grandma collect. There were 3 domestic violence incidents with his ex-wives, 2 bar fights, and an assault charge that had been pleaded down to disorderly conduct. The portrait painted was of a man with anger issues who resorted to violence when he didn't get his way, exactly the kind of person who would break down a door with a baseball bat. Melissa's testimony was a disaster for the defense. She took the stand thinking she could charm her way out of trouble, but Janet Mills had done her homework. Every lie Melissa told was immediately contradicted with evidence. She claimed she didn't know about the plan, but her own live stream started 20 minutes before they arrived at my apartment. She said she was just documenting, but her commentary on the video included encouragement, like, get her Derek, and make her pay. The moment that sealed their fate came when Janet played a portion of Melissa's live stream that she apparently forgot existed. In it from the car on the way to my apartment, all 3 of them discussed their plan. Mom laid out exactly how they would force me to sign over the house. Derek showed off his baseball bat, and Melissa giggled about how I would be so scared I'd give them anything they wanted. It was conspiracy to commit burglary caught on self-recorded video. The defense's final strategy was desperate. They argued for jury nullification, essentially asking the jury to ignore the law because this was a family matter that had gotten out of hand. They painted a picture of a family torn apart by grief and greed where everyone was a victim. The real criminal, they suggested, was the system that allowed one family member to inherit everything, while others suffered in poverty. Janet's closing argument was masterful. She acknowledged that family disputes over inheritance were common, but what made this criminal was the escalation to violence. She showed the progression from phone calls to harassment, to breaking and entering with weapons. She reminded the jury of Emma's testimony of a child so terrified she hid in a closet and wet herself. She asked them to imagine what would have happened if the police had arrived 5 minutes later. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts for all 3 defendants: breaking and entering criminal property damage conspiracy, child endangerment, and violating protective orders. The courtroom was silent as the verdicts were read except for Melissa's shocked gasp. She had truly believed until that moment that her social media fame would somehow protect her from consequences. Sentencing would come later, but the judge remanded Derek into custody immediately due to his history of violence and violation of bail conditions when he had tried to approach me in the parking lot after the verdict. Mom and Melissa were allowed to remain free pending sentencing, but their GPS ankle monitors would ensure they stayed far away from Emma and me. As we left the courthouse, Janet Mills pulled me aside. She had been a prosecutor for 25 years, she said, and this was one of the clearest cases of family violence escalation she had ever seen. She warned me that criminal conviction didn't mean this was over. People like my family who felt entitled to what others had often continued their campaigns through other means. I should remain vigilant, keep my security measures in place, and document any attempts at contact. Emma and I went home to our temporary safe house that night, and for the first time in months, I felt like we could breathe. The criminal trial was over. They had been found guilty, and there would be consequences for what they did to us. But as I tucked Emma into bed, I knew Janet was right. The criminal conviction was just one battle in a longer war. The civil case over the estate was still pending, and my family had shown they were capable of anything. We had won this round, but the fight for our peace and security was far from over. The sentencing hearing took place 3 weeks after the guilty verdicts. Derek received 2 years in state prison with possibility of parole after 18 months, the judge taking his history of violence into account. Mom got 18 months with work release privileges, though her gambling addiction would make finding work difficult. Melissa received 1 year in county jail and 3 years probation, her social media presence considered an aggravating factor in documenting and encouraging the crime. Watching them being led away in handcuffs and shackles should have felt like victory, but all I felt was exhausted sadness. These were people I had shared Christmas dinners with, who had been there for my childhood birthdays, who I had once called family. Now they were convicted criminals who had traumatized my daughter in their greed. The deputy who escorted them out told me this was common in inheritance disputes, families destroying themselves over money, but that didn't make it easier to witness. Emma started therapy the week after the trial ended. Dr. Patricia Morales specialized in childhood trauma and had experience with family violence cases. The first few sessions were rough, with Emma barely speaking and spending most of the time drawing pictures of houses with big locks and alarm systems. But gradually she began to open up about her fears, her confusion about why family would hurt them, her worry that they would come back. For myself, I found an unexpected source of healing in a support group for family estrangement. Every Thursday night, I sat in a circle with other people who had been forced to cut contact with toxic family members. Their stories varied, but the themes were consistent. The entitlement manipulation escalation to violence, and always the accusation that the victim was selfish for protecting themselves. Hearing that I wasn't alone, that others had survived similar ordeals, helped more than I expected. The group leader, a therapist named Dr. William Shore, introduced me to the concept of trauma bonding and why it was so hard to let go of people who hurt us. He explained that my guilt over the situation was normal, but misplaced. I hadn't destroyed my family by accepting Grandma's inheritance. My family had destroyed themselves through their choices and actions. This wasn't about a house, but about control entitlement and their inability to accept that Grandma had the right to distribute her assets as she chose. 6 months after the sentencing, I made the decision to write letters to all 3 of them. Not to send Dr. Shore was clear about that, but as an exercise in processing my emotions. I wrote to Mom about the childhood memories before her gambling consumed her, about wishing she had chosen her children over the casino. To Derek, I wrote about the brother who had taught me to ride a bike, wondering when his anger had become bigger than his love. To Melissa, I expressed sadness that she had never learned the difference between wanting something and deserving it. I burned all 3 letters in a small ceremony in Grandma's backyard, Emma helping me tend the fire. As the smoke rose, I told Emma we were letting go of the hurt and making room for happiness. She asked if this meant we'd never see them again, and I had to be honest that I didn't know what the future held, but for now, we needed to focus on healing and building our new life. She seemed to understand in that way. Children do accepting hard truths more easily than adults. The house on Maple Street slowly transformed from a symbol of conflict into a real home. We painted Emma's room her favorite shade of purple, planted a vegetable garden in the backyard, and hung new family photos to replace the ones destroyed in the break-in. Not photos of my birth family, but of our chosen family, including Tanya, who had become Aunt Tanya to Emma Sarah Chen, who still checked in regularly, and new friends from the neighborhood who had no idea about our dramatic past. My job situation resolved in an unexpected way. After being let go from my company of 15 years, I struggled to find new employment with the gap in my resume and the publicity from the trial. But Dr. Morales mentioned that her practice was looking for an office manager, someone organized and detail-oriented who could handle difficult situations with grace. My experience dealing with family chaos, it turned out, had prepared me perfectly for managing a mental health practice. Emma flourished in her new school near Grandma's house. The principal and teachers were aware of our situation, but treated us with discretion and kindness. Emma made friends quickly, children who knew nothing about scary uncles with baseball bats or grandmothers who encouraged violence. At her 9th birthday party, watching her laugh with her friends in the backyard Grandma had loved, I realized we had survived. We were different, changed by our experiences, but we had come through intact. The civil case over the estate concluded quietly with my family's lawyers withdrawing their challenge. Their criminal convictions had made contesting the will essentially impossible, and from prison they had little ability to continue the fight. I received formal letters acknowledging my sole ownership of the house and releasing any claims to the estate. The papers were signed with their inmate numbers below their names, a stark reminder of how far they had fallen. I learned through the victim notification system that Derek had been assigned to anger management and substance abuse programs in prison. Mom was in a gambling addiction program as part of her sentence. Melissa had lost her social media following after brands discovered her criminal record and dropped their sponsorships. Part of me hoped they were getting help, that maybe losing everything would force them to confront their issues. But I had learned the hard way that I couldn't save them from themselves. The letter from Derek came 1 year after the night of the baseball bats. It was forwarded through his lawyer to comply with the no-contact order. In it, he didn't apologize or take responsibility. Instead, he blamed me for his incarceration, for ruining his life, for turning the family against him. He demanded I put money in his commissary account and promised he would make things right when he got out. I gave the letter to the police to document the continued harassment and felt nothing but relief that he was still behind bars. Mom's letter arrived 2 months later. Hers was more subtle, full of guilt trips about her health problems in jail, how she was suffering, how she just wanted to hear Emma's voice one more time before she died. She included a photo of the 3 of them as children, a manipulation tactic so transparent it was almost insulting. This letter also went to the police, and I requested that the prison block any further attempts at contact. Melissa never wrote, but I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had started a blog about being a victim of the justice system, claiming she had been railroaded for documenting family truth. The blog had few readers and eventually disappeared when she couldn't pay the hosting fees. Her attempts to reinvent herself as a criminal justice reform advocate failed when anyone Googled her name and found the news stories about breaking into her sister's home with a baseball bat. 2 years after that terrible night, Emma and I were different people. She still had occasional nightmares, but they were rare. She had developed a confidence that came from surviving something terrible and coming out the other side. Her therapist said she was remarkably resilient, processing her trauma in healthy ways. She no longer asked about her grandmother and uncle and aunt. They had become past tense in her life, people who used to exist, but didn't anymore. I had changed too. The people-pleaser who had tried to keep everyone happy was gone, replaced by someone who understood that no is a complete sentence. I had boundaries now, steel-reinforced ones that protected my peace and my daughter's well-being. I had learned that DNA doesn't make family, that love is an obligation, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for toxic people is to stay away from them. The garden bloomed magnificently that spring. Grandma's roses coming back stronger than ever. Emma and I added our own touches, including a fairy garden she designed, and a bench where we could sit and watch the sunset. The house that had caused so much conflict had become our sanctuary, filled with laughter and love, and the kind of peace that comes from hard-won safety. I thought about Grandma, often hoping she knew that her gift had been preserved and cherished despite the war it caused. In quiet moments in her kitchen, I could almost hear her voice telling me she was proud that I had done what needed to be done, that protecting Emma was worth any price. She had known what her children were capable of and had tried to protect us even in death. Her true legacy wasn't the house, but the strength to stand up to those who would hurt us. The lesson I carried forward was both simple and profound. Family isn't about blood, but about behavior. The people who show up with baseball bats aren't family no matter what DNA you share. The people who stand beside you, who offer support without conditions, who respect your boundaries and celebrate your joy, those are your real family. Emma and I had lost 3 relatives, but gained a community of chosen family who enriched our lives immeasurably. Sometimes in grocery stores or at the gas station, I'd see someone who looked like them from behind, and my heart would race. The hypervigilance might never completely fade, Dr. Shore had warned me. But each day got a little easier. Each night's sleep a little more peaceful. We had survived the worst they could do, and we were still standing. More than standing, we were thriving, building a life filled with the kind of love that doesn't come with threats or conditions or baseball bats in the night. Emma asked me once if I thought they ever felt sorry for what they did. I told her honestly that I didn't know that some people get so caught up in wanting things that they forget how to love properly. But their feelings weren't our responsibility anymore. Our job was to live our best lives, to be kind to others, and to remember that real family shows up with casseroles when you're sick, not with weapons when you have something they want. She nodded solemnly and then asked if we could paint the shutters yellow, because yellow was a happy color, and our house should look happy. So we painted the shutters bright sunshine yellow, and every time I pull into the driveway and see them, I remember that we chose happiness over bitterness, peace over conflict, and love over entitlement. Grandma's house had become our castle, complete with bright yellow shutters and the best security system money could buy. And in the end, that's all the victory we needed. What started as the worst night of our lives had led us to discover our own strength and the true meaning of family. Not the family that breaks down doors demanding what they think they deserve, but the family that helps you install stronger doors and better locks. The family that brings soup when you're sick and celebrates when you're happy, expecting nothing in return but your friendship. That's the family Emma and I have now, and it's worth more than any inheritance could ever be. If you've dealt with toxic family members who felt entitled to what you've earned or inherited, I want you to know you're not alone. Your safety and your children's well-being matter more than anyone else's feelings. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is protect yourself from those who claim to love you while carrying baseball bats. What boundaries have you had to set with family members who couldn't respect your success? Share your story in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences. And remember, you deserve a family that shows up with love, not weapons. Thank you for joining me today, and may your home always be a place of peace and safety with the brightest yellow shutters you can find.